So this is the one of the works I made over the summer. That's full screen. Yep. So I'll just play it. Okay, so that's work I made over the summer. My background is working with and making work for artists, and both commercially as well, doing motion graphics, visual effects, mostly post-production stuff. But then, so I've started to look at how painters and artists use visual effects, as in use commercial level visual effects in their work. And also how visual effects artists and filmmakers use painting, which is still pretty broad. So I've been looking at image genealogy, so why the same images are being used over and over again in visual effects and popular film, and image anthropology, so not how they're being used, but why as well, and how we're forming both identities and forming images of ourselves through that, and obviously semiotics goes alongside that. And this really relates to composite and matte paintings and the use of romantic paintings as an influence, especially but not exclusively landscape. So within my own work, I'm really interested in ideology and the pastoral. And along with that, then the sublime, then obviously because we're moving paintings, this idea of stillness and duration, and then the historic chains of images and people's perception of reading them. What Belting calls image anthropology. So Bedwell Williams recently commissioned a commercial visual effects company to create this work to his design, and this is something I also do for artists, and this was shown in Cardiff last year, and it's an interesting case of a fine art context, 4K. This isn't it's just still from it, it's not the moving image, but of him commissioning them to make an artwork, going back to the craft idea, would have taken substantial money investment on their his point. Here's a still from The Island of the Dead, from Matt Collishall, who take an existing painting, in this case, the Brooklyn, sorry, and then animated it. In this case, showing a passing of time from morning to night. Here's work from Rob and Nick Carter, who employed the post-production visual effects company MPC to create these animated versions of still life paintings, which are good, but they just animate existing works. It's interesting kind of for the technique and the process, but not so interesting, I guess, from the idea that, you know, you're not moving it anywhere. So shifting it the other way, it's really interesting at the moment. They've got the art of Ray Harryhausen on at the Tate, and it looks at some of the paintings that inspired him, and where then goes on to inspire other kind of visual effects heavy films, especially within the fantasy and sci-fi genre. And I think you could probably just look at The Great Devil's Wrath for its influence on sci-fi and fantasy filmmaking imagery. So there's a definite link to romantic painting within fantasy and sci-fi. And then they get added in as matte paintings within that. So we see them over and over and over again. Lens scale, engagement with sublime, idyllic landscapes, and pastoral amongst others. And it's interesting to see the links between Harryhausen to Peter Jackson, back to John Martin and Francis Danby. So here's a link image between The Hobbit and A Funeral Procession by Francis Danby. It's a bit bright there, isn't it? Okay, so there's my work again, made in a kind of post-Brexit vote anger, I guess. So it was an interesting one to work with. And I'm just going to show you another one now. So this one's inspired by February Phil Dyke by Williams' Leader. Bear with me 1 second, because I came to this one from reading Kenneth Clark's on landscape painting, and in that he writes, this is held by the public to be a perfect truth to nature, and he compares it to Monet, Sisley and Pissarro, working at the same time both in France and here, and sees a contrast between true and false naturalism. Clark states, even in reproduction we see there is none of that unity of atmosphere, the general envelope of light, to use Corot's word, which is the essence of true naturalism. But then there is no unity of any kind. Nature has not been perceived as a whole, but described piece by piece. Leader still thinks of the world as made up of a number of things which have to be treated separately. And I was really interested in that, because what Clark sees as a weakness, I kind of am really interested in, this kind of idea of composite. So I'll just show you a second video. And then it loops. So what I'm stealing from here, it's got a Dorset link actually, it's quite interesting. Let's see if we can get that back. Is the Paul Nash painting Landscape from a Dream. So I've moved here 10 months ago, and I was really into Nash's Swanage surrealism period. I'm particularly interested in his symbolism that he used for this, which I've then transposed to what I'm interested in now. So he has the hawk represent the material world, which I've used the Reaper drone, and then the spheres represent for him his soul, which I quite like to crash through this kind of surface of that image that I'd animated. Okay, so to make these, I'm really interested in the technique and process and craft of working in composite images and visual effects. So again, I'm kind of mixing the technique, so that kind of idea of finding stuff. So everything is found on YouTube or from the Daily Mail photo archive, which I've used in here. And then it's interesting, so to take an empty landscape and add people, it makes a difference. It narrativizes it a lot. Take it wherever you want if you add people into a landscape, which I found really interesting as well. So the more I added stuff in, the more I thought I could play about with the areas I'm interested in, mixing both kind of high and lowbrow references. And also that when you're looking at it then in that John Burgess sense, you're never just looking at one thing. We're always looking at the relationship between the thing and ourselves. Okay, so I'm using the whole kind of visual effects toolkit there, and as I say, enjoy that kind of looking for that realism but not realism, the kind of verisimilitude of pixels and the techniques of visual effects artists. So I kind of enjoy the process of making these as well. So again, a kind of plea, I want to take these forward and what I'm doing with them. So I'm working on some 4K not commercial art projects at the moment. So I'm looking at that, what difference that makes in terms of showing them. And I'm also interested in how we start framing these works. I may take them into 3D. I may take them into 360. I'll come to that in a sec. But also, how do we show its importance in the sense of that, the frame around a video work, a 4K video work, or where we're placing it. So how might this help in my teaching as well? I'm really interested in this the visual literacy, kind of looking at a cross-disciplinary approach to visual effects, filmmakers, as improve their outputs. Also, kind of using existing paintings to drive narratives as well, what we can take from it, especially as we're kind of still using them without even realizing it sometimes. So not just written literature, but images as well. And then obviously that relates to image anthropology because they're preloaded, and we can then use that to our advantage or not. So I'm looking at belting at the moment, and this division between internal and external representation. So the images in the world and the images in our mind, from painting to historic filmmaking to repetition of those images through films, and then how that's now moving out of cinema into more spaces as well. Which images are continuing and why, I guess. So just current related projects that I'm doing. So I'm pushing my, so these are some roughs for a music video we're doing at the moment. So we're kind of cinematizing Bristol and industrial Bristol around Avonmouth. So this is for an artist called Kayla Painter. So I'm just trying to push myself in traditional digital matte painting techniques, that combination of things. So I'm working with the artist Rona Lee on a really, really big projection in Amsterdam, which is going to go live in November. And this image, when we started to play, really scared the bejesus out of me when I realized it's going to be that big and working at 4K. So that's really going to push my craft skills. I'm working, it's her work, but I'm helping her to realize that project. And the paintings that really interest me at the moment are the Rubens and Bruegel, the Elder collaboration on the allegory of the senses. What drew me to it was the veduta effect, the window in a painting, and then also just this absolute visual overload. And I think that could be, so Anthony's going to perhaps help me get going in Unity. But I've also used the software Fusion, which allows you to make 360-degree versions of that. So I'm interested to see what happens when I start combining this kind of interior, exterior element with people and those elements within that. And then the image that still grabs me is the David Inshaw painting of the badminton game. So I'm still using that as a kind of narrative influence. Thank you.